yeas are 241 and the nays are 190. The bill is passed. Without objection.
In its first session with a new mix of lawmakers, the House of Representatives approved 2 spending bills. They aim to get paychecks to around 800,000 federal employees. Some are working without pay, while others are on unpaid leave because previous funding had run out. The legislation includes a measure to reopen and fund the Department of Homeland Security through February the 8th. It also sets aside $1.3 billion to build border fencing and $300 million for other border security equipment, including cameras. The second spending bill would reopen 9 other federal agencies, including the Departments of Agriculture, Transportation, Commerce, and Justice through September the 30th. The legislation doesn't include President Donald Trump's demand for $5 billion to build a wall at the Mexican border. He says he won't sign any bill that doesn't have it, and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has promised not to pass one.
The president cannot hold public employees hostage because he wants to have a wall that is not effective in terms of its purpose, not cost effective in terms of what the opportunity cost it is of federal dollars to spend.
Addressing the lower chamber of Congress, Pelosi also promised to empower the middle class, preserve Obamacare, and tackle climate change.
We must fight for the middle class that is fair and fiscally sound, protecting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. We must also face the existential threat of our time, the climate crisis, a crisis manifested in natural disasters of epic proportions.
Some analysts say Pelosi's leadership puts the House on a collision course with the Republican-controlled Senate. Both parties will not only have to compromise to pass spending bills, they'll also have to agree on legislation that Trump will sign into law. Laila Humairah, TRT World.
Let's get more on this now with Jeffrey Tucker in Great Barrington, Massachusetts. He's the editorial director of the American Institute for Economic Research. Good to have you back on the program in the new year, Jeffrey. Let's look at the House Democrats' first order of business, and that was the bill that ends, well, technically ends the government shutdown. Donald Trump is almost certainly going to veto that because it doesn't fund his Mexico border wall. How is that showdown likely to play out?
Yeah, Trump will definitely veto this. There's got no hope for passage. He wants his wall. He's obsessed with the wall. That's all he thinks about. That's all he cares about. And so I'm guessing that this showdown is going to last several more weeks, even all the way into the 1st of February, which is going to become enormously annoying for a lot of people who are trying to visit Smithsonian museums, which is mostly what people care about when they visit Washington, D.C. So I wrote an article yesterday just suggesting that we should sell all these museums to the private sector and let them take it over so we don't have to worry about it anymore.
That would be interesting. We heard there in the story Nancy Pelosi pledging to strengthen the middle class. What sort of programs and, I guess, economic legislation can we expect that's in line with that pledge?
Well, this is where things get really depressing because the rhetoric sounds really good and it's all fine to strengthen the middle class. But once you start looking at the details, what you see is the Democrats have a massive intellectual problem. They can't think of anything to do except initiate huge new spending programs. Like this jobs guarantee they're proposing could end up being the most expensive government spending program in the history of the United States, not to mention the fact that it's not going to work. They also have this idea of a Green New Deal. That just means higher taxes on drivers and energy consumers, and we saw how that worked in France. That's not going to go anywhere. Socialized medicine, I'm sorry, but the Department of Veterans Affairs have been trying to run that program for 50 years, and everybody hates it. So they have not come to terms with 21st century market economics. And they keep trying to dig back to New Deal style 1930s big government programs and regulations. So it's very bad. I know so many people that can't stand Trump's trade wars and they find this border wall ridiculous. So the problem is, if the only alternative is what the Democrats are proposing right now, all they're going to do is drive voters back to supporting Trump, however reluctantly.
We also know that tax cuts for corporate America and for wealthy Americans formed a large part of Donald Trump's economic agenda. How might that agenda be frustrated now that the Democrats are in control of the House?
Yes, you're right. They will try to reverse all these tax cuts from 2017. But what's most interesting, once you run the numbers, his trade wars and his tariffs have actually cost taxpayers more than the tax cuts granted them in 2017. So, in other words, Trump has already reversed his own tax cuts through his tariffs, which are just another form of taxes. So if the Democrats get their way and they end up reversing his 2017 tax cuts, that's going to be an even higher burden on the middle class and on financial markets, and drive the U.S. economy further into weakness and finally into recession. It would be just a disaster.
No doubt, an interesting year for U.S. politics. Jeffrey Tucker, always a pleasure. Thank you.